Welcome to the Meta Business Podcast. The Metaverse and Web3 are bringing about the biggest revolution since the internet itself. With your hosts, Paul the Prophet Dawalibi and Jeff the Juice Cohen, we will be bringing you the latest Metaverse business news and insight into what it all means. The Meta Business Podcast starts now.
From the boardroom to the Metaverse, this is the Meta Business Podcast. I am Paul Dawalibi. I'm joined today by my friend and co-host, Jeff the Juice Cohen. For those of you who are new to the Meta Business Podcast, welcome. What we do here is we cover the most pressing Metaverse stories and news of the week, but we look at all of it through a business and C-suite lens. We dissect, we analyze the business implications of everything happening in the Metaverse and Web3 industries. For our regular listeners, for the people who have tuned in every single week, this is episode 8. Thank you guys. If you haven't yet, make sure you hit subscribe wherever you get this podcast, your favorite podcast apps. Maybe you watch it on YouTube, wherever you get this. Make sure you hit that subscribe or follow button and tell your friends and family, share it. That's the biggest thing we could ask for. If you share it with your friends, family, colleagues, if you love the content, if you enjoy the Metaverse content that we're putting out every week, really appreciate if you guys would share it. Jeff, how you doing this week?
Doing good. How about you?
You may have noticed I'm wearing this new jersey that has me on it, the Prophet, which was a very nice gift from our mutual friend Jimmy, who, as you guys, anyone who listens to this may know, co-hosts the Business of Esports podcast with me. But the cool part is it has Meta TV on the sleeve, Business of Esports on the other sleeve. It's pretty decked out. I've got the Prophet on the back.
Man, I guess I'm assuming mine's probably just in the mail. I haven't checked the mail in a while. So I actually, funny enough, this is going to sound weird. This is literally Jimmy's shirt. So Jimmy sent me a couple of shirts in the mail after when we were out in Vegas one night, and I told him I liked the shirt he was wearing. And a week later, he asked me for my address, and he literally sent me 4 shirts. So we are both wearing gifts from Jimmy. This is not interesting to anyone besides us two and Jimmy, probably, but yeah.
Well, it's a good plug to say. Make sure you guys watch the Business of Esports or listen to the Business of Esports podcast. Also, I will just say, a good chance that we will all get jerseys like this. We will need Meta Business merch at some point, but I think I'm the only one that has this right now. I know Jimmy wanted one, but doesn't have one like you. And so I think we will have to get that done for everybody at some point. But we need to get into the news because there's a lot of Metaverse news this week. And I think maybe more important than the jersey is the first story here, which is by far the biggest Metaverse news, business news that came out this week. And I'll read the headline here. The headline is "Cows Stuck Indoors for Winter Are Getting Virtual Reality Goggles to Feel Like They're Outside." Maybe the best part of this article is the picture. I thought this was photoshopped at first, but it genuinely seems, it's quoted as saying, this is a cow with VR glasses on. And it was taken in end of December.
For those of you who can't see the picture, it appears the cow is wearing 2 separate VR headsets, one on each eye, which I have to imagine is pretty trippy. So one eye thinks it's in one world, the other eye thinks it's in the other. I mean, that is interesting. Unless I guess they could be synced up. Yeah, this is the Metaverse. This is what we were promised. This is the
Metaverse we were promised, right?
Technology.
I mean, it maybe seems like a nothing story, okay? And maybe people will think we're just being silly. But I genuinely feel like there's a really interesting discussion to be had here, because everyone talks about the Metaverse from a gaming perspective, right? That's not new. Since Facebook's rebranding, there's a lot of discussion around the Metaverse for work, from a work perspective, right? How it's going to change work. But I feel like there hasn't been a lot of discussion around all of like the ancillary kind of Metaverse benefits, if you want to call that. And this is just one of those that I'm going, well, this is so clever. And I feel like there are probably human benefits that are similar to this, right? Like the headline is the idea is that the cows that are stuck indoors for winter, I guess they produce better milk, more milk if they're less stressed, right? And if they feel like they're outside, that'll make them less stressed. how is this any different than like human beings and when we talk about mental health and things like that?
It's absolutely a great point. I do wonder if maybe it's a little different that the human would know they're in VR, whereas the cow may really be tricked to thinking that they're in, a different pasture. But besides that, there certainly can be other benefits. We've talked on a live stream many times about potential military, training exercises, doctors, like, you don't want your doctor to be doing his first open heart surgery on you as the patient, but if it's, he's doing it in VR, that's a great way to practice and learn. So there definitely are, and this is all stuff that's, that is happening. So there definitely are a ton of different uses for, I guess, what we would consider VR, and also, you could kind of expand that to be the metaverse.
I just think, again, it's one of those things where, and I've blogged about this stuff, and I've had discussions around this, and I've sort of made lists in my own head of, here are all the industries that the metaverse essentially disrupts, right? Like the capital M metaverse will disrupt, the travel industry, the adult industry, right? Like all these other industries that get massively disrupted by the metaverse. But then, one of the ones that was not on my list was agriculture, right? Like that's not something I had thought of, but you see this real world application, and it's not 5 years or 10 years from now, right? It's today. And that can be big business. Like, I think people underestimate how big agriculture is as an industry. And if you can, make an impact, even in a relatively small way, you're talking about pretty big dollars.
Absolutely.
I love it.
If you think about just impacting yields, or any sort of anything in a small way is massive. Look at kind of agri-tech. Like, there's a lot of these things. If you could increase the crop yield by 5%, that's worth billions of dollars. So if these VR goggles can actually make the cows produce better, or grow faster, that's going to be a massive impact. And it's a fun story, obviously.
It's a fun story, but I think it's great that we highlight impact on industries that maybe people aren't thinking about, right? That are not as sexy, not as top of mind. And I wouldn't be surprised, like, again, maybe the cows are fooled, but I think human brains are not, they're obviously more sophisticated, but your brain's a powerful organ. It can fool your body into having positive benefits, right? Like, I see this translating to human beings. And I know there are VR apps and things around meditation and things like that, but I love seeing this story, and I love seeing the metaverse sort of creeping into other industries. Jeff, let's get a bit more serious here, and we've got 3 stories back to back, and you sent these to me, and I think it was really interesting to see sort of in 1 week 3 stories in the exact same kind of realm. And the realm here is NFT marketplaces. So let me show you the 3 stories. Let me read the 3 stories for those of you who are listening, at least the headlines, and then let's discuss them as a group, because I think they go together. And so the first one here is GameStop to launch NFT marketplace for gamers. Shares of the beleaguered gaming retailer were up about 20% in New York pre-market trading. This was last Friday. So this is GameStop coming out with their own NFT marketplace for gamers. Second story is the headline here is GameFi NFT marketplace Lootex closes $9 million funding round. The Taiwan-based asset marketplace features over 12,000 NFTs across 500 collections. So if you're not noticing the theme here, it's NFT marketplaces. And then the third story is leading NFT marketplace OpenSea raises $300 million. Firm's post-money valuation tops $13.3 billion. They announced that they had raised $300 million in a Series C funding round led by Paradigm and Coatue. It propelled the company to a $13.3 billion post-money valuation. So we've got 3 stories, Jeff, about NFT marketplaces. Some earlier stage, some later stage, and in GameStop's case, this is an established, public company launching one. I'm curious, just general thoughts on these stories as you see them back to back, and maybe sort of the specific question I have is this an environment where we're going to see 100 winners, 10 winners, one winner? Is it winner take all, right? So to speak. And how do you feel about the chances of these three kind of competitors?
It's a bunch of questions. I'll kind of go through a couple of them, and then I have some, maybe some questions to volley back to you.
Yeah.
I do think this is going to, there will be several different winners. I think, right now, OpenSea is definitely the leader in terms of kind of the broad NFT marketplaces. And the way I like to think about this, and the question I'll pose to you is sort of, on one hand, you have broad base, kind of, you're trying to be the everything store, the Amazon. That's kind of what OpenSea is doing. I think that's what FTX is doing. That's what Coinbase is looking to launch an NFT marketplace, and that's sort of being like the everything store. The place where if you want to buy an NFT, you just go there, and it'll probably be there. Versus sort of the niche vertical focused, I think, NFT stores, where you have something like NBA Top Shots, you have what DraftKings is doing with their DraftKings marketplace. And that's where I think, the question I have posed for you with gaming, where does that fit in? I have my opinion, but I kind of want to hear yours first. Do you think the ultimate winner, because I think you and I both agree, we're both big believers in kind of Web3 and sort of blockchain gaming. I do think that there will be at least one massive gaming NFT marketplace. Will it be one of these bigger players like an OpenSea, or is there room for kind of a vertical focused sort of competitor to be that one winner?
It's a great question. I'm not convinced that genre-specific marketplaces will carve large enough niches to justify the kinds of valuations maybe we're seeing now. Lootex raised, according to this article, and I'll bring it back up, raised a $9 million seed round, right? Like we're talking about the first money in, right? The very first dollars. $9 million is a really big seed round. And I know not so much these days. I'm a little old fashioned in that sense. I guess in the current world we live in, that's more and more normal. But, in a world where in the same week, a direct competitor raised $300 million, I question a little bit the thought process of the investors in the game specific NFT marketplace, Lootex, right? And I use as a comparison just e-commerce in general, because fundamentally we can call them NFT marketplaces. They're stores, right? They're storefronts to go buy and trade NFTs. Amazon has dominated, right? Like there's a reason GameStop as a specialty vertical retailer has struggled. And yes, they're burdened with physical stores and things like that, but specialty retail for the most part has been defeated by Amazon, right? Like we seem to live in a world where everything stores win. At least Amazon does.
It's fair, but I guess the counterexample is that you have seen some product categories do well, like Chewy with pet food and pet supplies, Wayfair with furniture. Like this sort of concept of growing niches. Like this happened, I think, with eBay, where eBay was sort of trying to be the platform for everything, and then you did see a bunch of different kind of niches split off. Even if you look at Craigslist, kind of got defeated by Airbnb and some of these more vertical kind of focused things. But I think you do bring up a good point with Amazon and kind of having one place where everyone goes. This is definitely a network effects, because we're not talking about physical goods here. This is purely network effects. It's like, where do I want to list my NFT? Probably the place where there's the most buyers, and buyers want to come to the place where there's the most liquidity and most things to buy. So, we are definitely talking about a network effects driven platform. So maybe it is just, hey, the one winner, the OpenSea, whoever's the biggest will end up being the biggest just because of network effects. But to me, I'm more on the side of vertical focus. So I do think for games, particularly with the gamer audience, like I just think there's something about the branding to gamers. Like I do think you're going, it's part of the reason why, Amazon hasn't won in game distribution. Like why do people go to Steam versus, various other places that they could be buying games? I think there's something to be said for gamers wanting their own platform and kind of their own user experience and their own marketing. So I'd be a little more bullish on the vertical focused ones than maybe you are.
I mean, Jeff, the question I have for you is like, or at least the comment I would make is, vertical focus to me has to add some value in some way, right? Like I would buy furniture from Wayfair instead of from Amazon because I believe Wayfair knows more about furniture. They don't source anything that's like such low quality that it's going to fall apart in the first day, right? Whereas if I buy furniture on Amazon, maybe I don't know it's it's made in China and it falls apart 2 seconds later. In some ways you go to a vertical, like a highly specialized retailer, because you're getting some value there. They're doing some of the thinking for you, some of the curation for you. And I'm just not sure that's what's driving the NFT space today, right? It's not like we need someone to curate it for us. The biggest drops make all the money, right? The biggest artists make the majority of the money. And I think people will go where the biggest drops go, is my sense today. Now, is there room 5 years from now for a specialty sort of marketplace that's more gamer specific? I buy that. I just don't know if they'll ever become that big, right? Like Wayfair compared to Amazon, we're talking at least 2 orders of magnitude, right? Probably
more, but we're still talking about Wayfair. I think is at least a multi-billion-dollar company. So there's juice to be squeezed there. Like you wouldn't be upset if you created the next Wayfair.
No,
obviously.
No. And $9 million seed round tells me there's real commitment around whatever this vision is, right? They have some money, but it's also like, again, if my competitor tomorrow raised 300 million to go do exactly what I'm doing, I mean, that would keep me up at night. It would also justify what I'm doing, right? I go, well, I'm in the right space. So it's not that I'm down on Lootex here or what they're trying to accomplish. And I think they have to do this. So that's, I think, the other part of the conversation, which is what choice do they have, right? When you already have 2 or 3 everything stores, you're not going to be the 4th everything store. That definitely doesn't work. You have to specialize, and you hope you carve out a significant enough niche that you have a very profitable business, or that the everything store eventually buys you, which
Amazon has done, many, right? They did it with diapers, Quidsy or whatever it was called. They did it with they've done it with a couple
in the toy space.
Zappos, so that is, I guess, a model where you create a niche kind of, again, Zappos was just selling shoes, Quidsy just selling diapers, I think, and some baby products. And then, the OpenSea or the Amazon, comes and buys them. So maybe that is part of the approach here. But I think there's an opening, like a flank with, discoverability potentially. And then the other thing I was going to say, why maybe I'm a little more bullish on GameStop than I kind of had thought I would be, because I think when a lot of people saw this headline at first with GameStop, there was a lot of eye rolling, and it was like, oh, classic, the meme stock, is going after the most buzzword possible at the moment. They're never going to be able to execute on this. And then I thought about it a little bit, and I'm not sure that GameStop can execute on this. I don't know that they have the developers to do so. But if we assume they're able to actually build something that's technically sound, I think they have some decent advantages in terms of when you're thinking about building a platform, you need a couple things. You need kind of player relationships, and I'll call that customer relationships. So you need a lot of people coming to your site, name recognition. They have that, particularly with the kinds of people right now that are into this community of, let's call a spade a spade. It's a little bit of speculation and gambling. Well, guess what? They have the community of hundreds of thousands of quote unquote apes that went and bought their stock and love GameStop. Those are pretty much the exact people that are going to go trade and buy on these kind of marketplaces, at least as the early adopters. And then 2, I think to be a games focused platform here, you're going to need publisher and developer support. So you need blockchain games to say, hey, this is where I'm going to list my NFT. And GameStop has those relationships. So if they execute on this right, they could be one of the few platforms that has the name recognition, sort of the trust, and both sides of that kind of platform to bring to the table to really gain scale quickly. And so I think I'm more bullish than most on the GameStop NFT announcement.
When you started this thought, I was like, man, I'm gonna come after Jeff. I totally disagree with this. I get the OpenSea one. I'm a big fan of they did over 14 billion in sales of NFT sales on OpenSea last year, right? Like these are big numbers. Big fan of that sort of transaction. Lootex, I get it. Specialty, still a big financing, but I could see where that goes. It was the GameStop one that I didn't really understand, right? That was the head scratcher for me. And my mind was in a place of like, this is just pump and dump, get the apes to pump the stock, which seems to be in line with the nothing else GameStop's doing, right? They have this new management, supposedly this new vision, and they've done nothing, right? Literally nothing. Mm-hmm. And then I was trying to find a reason for this NFT marketplace. And when you started on that point, I was about to sort of cut you off and say that you're totally wrong. And then I think, Jeff, you made a great point about like, maybe it's the tie-in with the publishers, right? Maybe they leverage those relationships. Here's my question to you, though. If you're GameStop, and that is the play, and I think that's a smart play. Now, big question mark if the publishers still respect them at all, or if they're still, who knows, because GameStop hasn't really been relevant for quite a while now. But if that's the case, why not advertise that strategy, right? Why are we not seeing, Ryan Cohen come out and be like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is not just a pump and dump where this NFT marketplace is going to fit in with, we're going to leverage these publisher relationships. We're going to be the one-stop shop for all the big games NFTs, right? Like,
one thing I would say, I think usually if you're going around saying we're not a pump and dump, that's usually a bad sign that you are. But I think part of it is they like sort of being, and I'm totally guessing at this, obviously. I think they like kind of being shrouded in mystery a little bit, where I sort of think this Ryan Cohen guy gets off on this a little bit, being like this man of mystery that the apes follow. And, I am sure if you're an analyst or you were, a real investor in their company and you talk to them, these guys are smart guys, right? They hired a bunch of people from Amazon. Ryan Cohen, founder of Chewy, which was obviously an example that we used of someone who sort of niche attacked Amazon in the past. So has sort of expertise of building kind of a digital platform or an e-commerce platform. I would imagine if you sat down with him, that this is what he would be saying. I think they sort of like having kind of this devil may care, like ape-ish attitude a little bit. Or maybe they're just not good at communicating to investors. It could be either of those. But part of me thinks it's like they're a little bit shrewd. I'm giving them a little bit of credit here.
Let me offer a third explanation. Is that you're right? You advanced a more clever idea than they've thought of, and so I have my doubts that they've thought of this. I'll do it, although I do agree it's a great idea. And if I was them, I would definitely be doing it or thinking about it. The bigger problem to me is I just suspect they can't do it at this point. That it's a combination of two things. Their own market power has eroded, right? They're not as relevant as they used to be to gamers. And so that's a bit of it's a tougher sell. And second, I think the publishers, when they're looking at Web3, when they're looking at Metaverse now, when they're looking at all this, call it next gen stuff, right? I think most have come to the conclusion that they can figure it out themselves. I think they learned the hard way that handing power to marketplaces with games in the past has not, that they would have been better off going direct to the customer. And I think we're seeing more of an aversion to marketplaces with the big publishers, right? Who are all launching their own stores, who are all trying to go direct, who are all, have their own services now. I suspect most of them do not want to deal with a third party when it comes to NFTs and won't want to deal with a third party.
That's an absolutely great point as it relates to AAA publishers. But I think as it relates, because I do think you're right. I don't see, an Activision or an EA anytime soon wanting to give up control of what effectively could be an incredibly important marketplace and distribution platform. We've already seen them doing the opposite, as you mentioned. But as it relates to these new blockchain games and sort of Web3 gaming, I kind of think it has to be that way, because I just don't know if that customer, I think, doesn't want too much power with the developer. I think they want to be able, they specifically want to be able to take their assets from one game and go sell them on a different platform. If they're selling them on the same platform that they bought them, I think that it almost it's disqualifies it immediately from being what they consider in this Web3 ethos.
But yeah, and this is the point I wanted to sort of close this out on, which is the bigger philosophical question, which I think you've alluded to here, which is, we're talking about an object in an NFT that is fundamentally decentralized, right? It's recorded on a blockchain that is decentralized. It's right. The product itself, the object itself, is distributed and decentralized. And then we're trying to we're having a discussion around very centralized kind of like monolithic marketplaces where all of this still has to happen. It seems philosophically like at odds with the ethos and the thinking behind NFTs in the first place.
I'm sure you saw this became like a big sort of theme on Twitter over the last couple of weeks with like Jack Dorsey, and I forget who he was kind of arguing back and forth with. Basically, the argument was like, who owns Web3? And it's like, can you really say Web3 is decentralized if something like OpenSea, is owned by venture capitalists and just took $300 million from Co2, which is a massive hedge fund. So it's like, who is it really decentralized if it's, like you just said, owned by one monolithic platform, and that monolithic platform is owned by the same people who owned Web2? I don't know.
It's a question I'd love. I'd love feedback from our listeners on this one. Just what do they think in terms of, what do you guys think in terms of, fundamentally decentralized kind of products, objects being at odds with completely centralized and monolithic marketplaces that have clear ownership and things like that. So it's a power struggle I think we haven't seen the end of, and I am curious how it plays out, and I'm curious what our listeners think about it. Jeff, let's move on because there's a story here which also very interesting, and I'll say sort of a fringe metaverse story here. And the headline here this is from Forbes. The headline is Fan-Controlled Football League raises $40 million Series A round led by cryptocurrency investors. And so for those of you who don't know, fan-controlled football, it's exactly what it is, what they says it is. I think it's 7-on-7 football where the spectators, you, the fan, can make decisions in terms of the play that's called, in terms of the players that are drafted, right? Like you have some level of control over what goes on the field. And they've raised a bunch of money now from Animoca Brands and Delphi Digital, both VCs that specialize in cryptocurrency investments. And let me just be clear here. The thing they're doing that is crypto or Web3 related is they are going to be minting, they're going to launch 8,888 NFTs related to the 4 new franchises that are coming out. And people who purchase the NFTs will become fans of the team and have a chance to draft players, choose plays, and receive other perks. So NFTs, I guess, as a method of owning and having influence over these new franchises. I'm curious, I know, Jeff, you're a football fan. What do you think of fan-controlled football and their sort of tie-in with crypto and NFTs and the metaverse here?
I actually really like it. So I had been pretty bearish on fan-controlled football previously, mostly
Why?
Because any football league that has tried to start that wasn't the NFL has basically failed for the last 30 years. The XFL twice, USFL once, the one they tried last year that failed, the one they're doing this year that I guarantee you is also going to fail, this one prior to this, resuscitation via crypto. So none of them have worked. That's sort of not the point of the story here. I think the crypto angle and sort of the NFT angle is interesting because it gives it's pretty amazing decentralization. The fact that you're sort of giving up ownership of these teams to the players, kind of almost in a DAO like function. To me, I think that's really interesting and just to be a fascinating sort of social experiment. And I like that all of them have sort of like popular crypto personalities behind them. Like I saw in the article, one of them is owned by Steve Aoki, and other one's owned by Marshawn Lynch, and various different personalities that I think, could potentially grow to have almost like a Bored Ape Yacht Club type following, if this gets to, a further extent. So I think that's pretty cool. Also, as someone who's a big Madden fan, I love the idea of being able to call plays and then watch them happen on the field. Every time I watch a football game, I think I could be better than the coaches. So I think it's a cool thing that, you'll be able to do that. Also, I like that it's proportional to how much of the NFT you own. So it's like if you theoretically own 51% of the NFT, you can control the game. You're literally the coach, you're the owner of the team, and you're essentially controlling the players on the field. I think that's, that in of itself is pretty cool and can drive some value to these coins. I'm curious how long it's going to be until we see an esports league do this. Because to me, this is essentially a lot of this can be done with esports. Right now you're just doing it with players, like actual human being players rather than digital players. But a lot of these same concepts could easily work with esports. So I don't know, those are some of my musings, but I'm curious what you think.
No question. Let me just, there was one quote from this, which I want to hone in on, and I'm curious specifically what you think on it, because I have some thoughts. And the quote is, this was from a partner at Lightspeed Venture Capital. And they're the VC firm that led FCF's fan controlled football seed round, and they participated in this current Series A round. And he is quoted as saying, there's a ton of overlap of crypto enthusiasts as sports fans. It's definitely a big Venn diagram overlap. That specifically stood out for me because I wasn't sure if that was actually true. We've had these discussions on Business of Esports around overlap of esports fans and sports fans, and overlap of esports fans and crypto. And there's very strong overlap between esport, like gamers and crypto, very strong. But gamers and sports fans, there's not a lot of overlap. So like by what is it? What is the
transitive
mathematical transitive property, whatever, right? Like I'm not convinced that crypto and sports, there's a ton of overlap here. So while I buy kind of the premise, and I think it's cool personally, right? Is there enough interest from sports fans for this kind of tie-in?
So I'm not sure I've seen the data, but I do think anecdotally we've seen enough whether it's, the Staples Center in LA was just renamed Crypto.com Center. FTX invested in, they renamed, I think, the Miami Heat. So like,
true.
I think there's enough. And to be fair, that could all just be driven by someone said this quote and it's like now become a truism. Like, oh, well, of course there's overlap between crypto and sports fans. Like, but I imagine there's some sort of YouGov type data source out there that's sort of informing all these investments, because we have seen a lot of athletes are doing investments in crypto, getting investments in crypto, and Tom Brady's a sponsor of FTX, stuff like that. So my guess is that there is some data out there that's showing that this is true, and it's not just everyone kind of believing this myth. But I have not seen the data.
And then the second sort of thought I had, and you alluded to it a little bit, which is like, this is childhood dream, right? It's like, in some ways, it's like Madden, but in real life. But then the metaverse sort of the metaverse prophet in me says, why do we need the real life component then, right? Like fundamentally, couldn't we just do all of this digitally, right? It could just be fan controlled Madden, which is basically just Madden. And this is where, from a business standpoint, I'm not sure if fan controlled football survives long term, right? It feels a little bit like and I think that we're going to see a lot of this, where the metaverse, we know, and we all talk about, capital M, is going to be massively disruptive to a lot of things. And there will be sort of like these middle steps, right? These it's not the last step. It's not the first step. It's sort of the small steps in between that you forget about. And this feels a little bit like that. And I'm sure that will be a theme in other podcasts where we see these kind of middle steps that get disintermediated as technology gets better and go away. Like at some point, VR football is going to be so good that why would we have fan controlled, with human players and things like this? Like, why wouldn't we just do it all digitally or something like that? I just don't see it as a viable business long term. And the NFT thing feels, while I get the point, feels a little bit forced to me here. Right? This is one of those things where it feels like we'll glom this on and and now it's attractive to investors because fundamentally they could have done this without NFTs, right? Like they didn't need NFTs to do what they're doing here.
Well, some would argue that that's the case for anything with NFTs. Like you rarely need decentralized blockchain technology. It's just the pipes. But I think I don't disagree with you that this probably won't work. I am, like I said, more bullish on this than I was about fan-controlled football. I still don't really I probably wouldn't be buying some of these tokens just in my own personal money, but I am more bullish on it. I will say though, just to give them some credit, in terms of NFT projects we've seen, like crossovers between NFT and sports, this is one of the more interesting ones, and the NFT does get you something, right? Like the fact that if I buy enough of the NFT, I could sit there on a Saturday morning and literally call the plays that Johnny Football goes out and does. That to me is a heck of a lot more interesting than buying an NBA Top Shot, where it's just like, oh, I'm watching like a JPEG of someone shooting a free throw like that. To me, like that never made sense to me. Like there was not a ton of value there. Whereas this, I do see there's some value. I think there will then be a next step where it gets even more interesting, and maybe it's having to do with esports. Maybe it's disintermediating the physical players, something like that. But I do think it's a positive step in the right direction, and it's interesting for kind of the sports, metaverse, esports, media scene to pay attention to. It's an interesting experiment, if nothing else.
Agreed, 100%. You're right. You make a great point, which I hadn't thought of. It's definitely better than an NBA Top Shot like that. No question. This is more interesting. There's some utility here, right? I come back to that point of like, well, there's utility at least. But it feels like an intermediate step for me. That's the right word. Like it feels like a stepping stone to something bigger and better and more interesting and more true metaverse, I guess. Jeff, that wraps up this week's podcast. Man, that flew by.
Great show. Best one yet.
Best one yet. For those of you who are enjoying this content, please just tell others, tell your friends, family, colleagues about the podcast. Make sure wherever you listen to it, whether it's on Spotify, Google Play, anywhere you get this show or Apple Podcasts, wherever, leave a review if you can. But make sure you follow or subscribe so that you get notified when a new episode comes out. They drop every Monday. And we thank you guys for tuning in every week. We welcome your feedback if you're loving the show. Jeff, thank you as always.
Thanks,
everyone.
And
we will see you guys next week.
Thanks for joining us here on Meta Business. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast everywhere you get your podcasts, leave a 5-star review, and tell your friends, family, and colleagues all about us. Also, make sure to follow Meta TV on all socials to get more of the best metaverse content anywhere. Tune in every week for another episode of Meta Business.